Hey everybody, so Colin is an engineer at Facebook and he reached out because he's building a digital marketing tool that lets you run ads across 8 platforms, LinkedIn, Google, and Facebook through a single app. So the software will automatically improve campaigns based on real-time performance data. So what he wants to know is what has been the biggest pain point as a digital marketer? Do you have trouble developing ad copy, analytics, trying to find the right marketing agency? Yeah, so let's get into it. Okay, so when you asked me this question, I had a knee-jerk reaction to tell you that everything is really cool and that sounds awesome. When you're giving people, when you want to try to do like a user interview and figure out whether or not they would actually use your product, people have a tendency to lie to you. And there's a book called The Mom Test that I wish I would have read when I first started like building and growing companies, because it teaches you that everybody will lie to you. And when I give this advice, I'm going to try to be very, very honest about my actual usage and things that I actually would and would not want. But I swear if you read this book, you're going to save yourselves literally years of realizing you're doing user interviews and questions incorrectly. So first piece of advice, go read the Mom Test. I promise you, you will love it. Okay, so my main problems with this is that the value prop seems to be easily run ads across 8 different platforms. And that's not really an issue that I have. I'll go into more specific reasons why in just a little bit. But I actually care a little bit more about the second line, is that the software will automatically improve my ads with real-time performance data. If you can actually do that, that's freaking amazing. But the major questions I have is, will you be able to improve my ads better than Facebook and Google? If you're able to do that, that's freaking awesome. When I go to sleep, I dream about how do I get more conversions out of Google. I don't dream about how do I more easily do my job. All right, so how do I effectively spend like $1 million plus? That is the whole point of my job, is I take in money and I effectively deploy it and I maximize ROI for my company. Almost always there's an 80-20 rule on channels. So usually Google will be better than Facebook, or Facebook will be better than Google. LinkedIn almost never works. Occasionally there will be some weird channel that works specifically for a specific product or brand. But almost all the time there's an 80-20 rule on channel, which means that I'm not generally focused on how do I deploy a campaign across 8 different channels. It's usually there's one channel that I'm hyper focused on. And there's a formula that I am basically playing over in my head, which is ad spend times the effectiveness of my creative times the effectiveness of my landing pages equals results. So these are the 3 areas that I really focus on, which is how do I effectively deploy my ad spend? How do I do creative that has really, really high CTRs and is perfect for whatever channel I'm in? And then how do I optimize and maximize my landing pages to generate the maximum amount of results from my ad spend? So there are occasions where I'm basically trying to buy across 8+ channels. And during those occasions, I'm usually spending a lot of money and I'm usually optimizing for volume. The times in my life where I've had basically been like, okay, we need to do Facebook, we need to do Google, we need to do Twitter, we need to do LinkedIn, we need to do X, Y, and Z. Those are usually huge ad spends. Usually what that means is that I'm on like a world domination campaign and we've already maxed out everything on Google. We've already maxed out everything on Facebook. And now we're starting to get desperate for volume and we're trying to figure out, how does Bing work? How does Twitter work? What are all the different channels that we can keep deploying cash? And usually when I get to that point, what I'm trying to say is, just because I'm trying to compete on 8 different channels, I'm usually trying to maximize 8 different channels, and I'm hyper focused on how do I get the most ROI at that point, at that huge, huge scale. So even then at that point, I'm not super worried about how do I easily manage this huge campaign. I'm more concerned about how do I hyper focus on every single channel and just optimize the crap out of the whole thing. All right. So the last thing I want to go over are what are the pain points of digital advertising? Like, what are the things that I struggle with the most? So one of the things I struggle with a lot is how do I get my creative that performs better? Um, this is something I devote a lot of energy and resources into is how do I create really, really awesome creative that has high CTRs and results in more results. It's something that lots of advertisers struggle with. If you have shitty creative, you have shitty campaigns and you're going to end up blowing your money. It's a direct multiplier of how effective your campaigns are. And the larger the campaigns get, the more important this becomes. When you're spending $5 million a month and you're generating hundreds of millions of dollars in revenue from that spend, like even a 1% improvement in like campaign performance results in like $1 million of revenue, right? So when you get to that scale, like you literally spend $1 million to have creative that performs 1% better, and that'll have a positive ROI. The next thing that I spend a lot of time on is a really struggle no matter what is how do I optimize the ML of my campaign? The ML for Facebook and Google, it changes constantly, and how important it is, or not how important, but how effective or what I need to actually do changes depending on the size and scope of the campaign and what specifically I'm working on. And then sort of tied to that point is how do I implement conversion tracking to make sure that I'm optimizing my campaign? This seems as simple as maybe integrating with Segment or putting up some conversion pixels, but it actually gets ridiculously hard to implement correctly, especially with cross-site attribution, especially when you're dealing with things like mortgage loans where the leads don't convert for maybe 3 to 6 months. The longer the life cycle, the harder this can be to track, and you can always track leads and closer to the top of the funnel, but it's a huge problem. How do you actually implement your conversion tracking? And then something that I think a lot of digital marketers don't talk enough about is you can be the best digital advertiser in the world. I worked on campaigns where we're spending $2,000 a month and making $100,000 off of that 2K, right? Like a 50x ROI. And for the life of me, I wasn't able to get them to increase my budget. Like we were making cash hand over fist, and I just could not get my way into leadership to convince them to take me from 2K a month to 4K a month Google SEM spend. So the last thing that's actually a really huge part of my job, both in agency life and being in-house at brands, is how do you communicate results in a way that will make it so my budget is safe and my budget will increase. It becomes a really, really important part. Everything comes down to what are the different levers that maximize my ROI and how do I optimize them? If you have a product or service that will allow me to more effectively increase one of the levers that are able to create more money out of my campaigns, I will use that. But if it's something that will make it more easy for me to do my job or make it where if it doesn't tie back to how do I make more money off of my ad spend, I probably won't end up using it. And if it does make it so I can have a higher ROI, I probably will use it.